Zadrizes buzdari skozdau.
Hey, I for sure have ADHD. I'm self-diagnosed slightly autistic. But one of the things that happens when I do live streams is that I get really excited because I know people are watching me, and that alone makes my, excitement go up. And then also, I only do them once a week, and I literally prepare for them days in advance. And because of that, I have a hard time staying focused, giving proper definitions of things, and then also giving you all the content and entertainment you deserve. There's a lot of y'all have been subscribed to me for years, and it's been my goal over the past year and a half, several years, to get not just more knowledgeable about the things that I'm talking about, but also appear more professional. So this is slightly edited, right? But for the most part, this is a Winds of Winter prep. I don't even know how long it's going to be, but as you can see, we're starting with Bran Stark. All right, so this entire thing is unscripted, like 99.9% of my videos. Although I've read all of the A Song of Ice and Fire books 7 times. Like I'm on my 7th reread of A Storm of Swords right now. Right, so let's start with Bran. I'll talk about a few members from each house, and then we'll see where it goes. All right. Okay, so Bran, right, is a character that George, you can tell has a really fun time writing. Also, you can tell through Bran that George R. R. Martin doesn't have kids. Okay, you can also tell through Sansa and Arya. And I've mentioned this before in my videos, but in short, the amount of insight that George gives an 8-year-old boy is unbelievable, even in a fantasy world. And this isn't even a complaint. This is just like something that I've noticed about his character that I want to discuss, right? So what I mean by that is that Rickon, right, is several years younger than Bran, but acts the most like all of the other children in the story. He acts like how they should be acting, right? So, for instance, to switch it around a bit, when in a Clash of Kings, Tommen and Joffrey are preparing to joust. This is through Sansa's POV. Okay, it's mentioned that by Joffrey that Tommen is basically, not verbatim, but he's basically a little fool and he shouldn't be, playing and acting like a child, right? Myrcella then chimes in and says, shouldn't we though? Aren't we children, right? So from that perspective, okay, George actually knows that the way he writes Bran isn't from the background of someone who has children, because he could, if he wanted to, write Bran more like a child. What he does, or what he conveys while writing Bran's character, is the same thing that Frank Herbert does in his books when writing Paul Atreides. Frank Herbert wrote Dune. Dune is the highest-selling sci-fi novel of all time. It's literally my favorite series. I am about, in audiobook world, about an hour from finishing Children of Dune. Paul Atreides has come back. Leto has equipped himself with a full-on sandworm second skin, right? But that's getting me too sidetracked. One of the things that I immediately noticed in Dune is the likeness. The cold, calculating, measuring, less human. Most of the characters in Doom are like those things that I just described. And Bran is very similar to that. So George is not just a genius. He is a subtle genius, right? Like, it's so amazing, right? So getting back on track here, Bran starts out this story as the first perspective we get of Ned Stark, of who Ned Stark is and what his kids think of him, right? So obviously Jon Snow's perspective is going to be different. Robb Stark never has a POV, and Rickon hasn't had a POV yet, right? So through Bran's eyes, from the very beginning, from A Game of Thrones, from book 1, we get to see how Bran sees the world and then how that changes, right? So one of the first things that happens is Bran watches his father behead a Night's Watchman. So getting back or slightly touching back on the acting like a child, this is immediately the first thing that Bran sees in the beginning of this story. So obviously, watching your father kill a man would knock any child, you get what I'm saying, right? That would knock you into adulthood immediately. Like, not only did you watch your father kill someone, but by all the laws and all the rules and tradition of that world, it is accepted, and what Ned Stark did is the right thing to do. And that actually, in that world, Ned actually does make a lot of sense, because he tells Bran, he teaches all of his children, if I am the one to condemn you to death, you being whoever is being judged by Ned Stark, with Ned being the Lord in Winterfell and the man who condemned the other person, the other man or woman to death, you should be the one to do it. You can't say something and not feel the impact of it unless you do it yourself, right? So this is what Ned teaches his children. So Bran is traumatized. He suffers from PTSD immediately because he watches his dad kill a man, but then also he learns one of the best lessons that any character could learn in this story, and it's that if you pass the sentence of death, you got to do it yourself. If you want someone to worship you and be your loyal servant or just your knight, right? You have to first do it yourself. How would you ever appreciate something unless you did it yourself? So this is why the Starks are a lot of people's favorite characters. Like, from the very first moments, anybody who's reading Bran's POV, Ned's POV, Jon Snow's POV, you immediately can relate to something. Right? If you're a decent person, or if you think you're a decent person like myself, like I'm actually a terrible person, but I can relate to some of the things that Bran Stark feels as this little boy and living in this society, in the world that he lives in. Very much a feudal society, right? One of the big things about Bran is that in my opinion, and this is a bit of a complaint, right? So when Bran, and this is all prep for Winds of Winter, so I'm kind of just doing like a full out journey. When Bran, ends up finding out about his father's death, right? To me, that was a little bit unbelievable, right, at first. But now after many rereads, I understand that even though Ned is teaching Bran one lesson, he's either intentionally or unintentionally or subconsciously teaching him another lesson, is that death is certain. The only thing in life, in this life, is that death is certain. So, if you're unaware, the guy that Ned beheads in front of Bran in the first chapter in the Game of Thrones is a deserter of the Night's Watch. He's telling Ned, bro, there are White Walkers up there. The person in particular, the deserter of the Night's Watch, is someone who's so loyal. We find this out later on when we get the POV of Tyrion and Jon Snow when they're at the actual wall in Game of Thrones about halfway through the book. We find out that the dude that Ned Stark beheaded in front of Bran is actually someone who may have even been the Lord Commander, because he spent so much time at the wall. He never left in all those years. He never abandoned his position. He never deserted the Night's Watch in the 40 plus years that he spent there. He's been at the wall longer than Craster himself. He's never, ever done anything like what he's doing now. And Ned is hearing him out, but ultimately he still kills the man. So that lesson that Ned Stark taught his children, right, about how, if you are the one who's going to pass the sentence of death, you should be the one who swings the sword yourself. He also teaches his children that death are certain. So from that point forward, Bran knows that his dad is eventually going to die. You lived by the sword, you died by the sword. And this is something that I kind of picked up. It's sort of loose, right? But ultimately, it makes sense in thinking about that one thing, like about how Bran literally gets over Ned's death pretty much immediately and starts, filling in the role of leader, Lord at Winterfell, rather, when Robb goes down south. he sort of falls in that position, but it makes the most sense because when you go back to the very beginning, Bran watched his father kill a man. So when you see something like that, especially at an early age, just makes the most sense that one would potentially see things in a different light, right? So just continuing on Bran as a person, or Bran's journey rather, throughout this story, you get to see a child age very quickly, right? But because Bran is at Winterfell, and for the first 2 books, or the first book and a half, he's the safest character for the longest, right? Once everybody else leaves Winterfell, that's when the story picks up. So when Ned Stark goes south with Sansa and Arya and initially he's going to take Bran. That's why I'm struggling here, but obviously Bran has his accident, so Bran doesn't go with him. So when Ned goes down south with his 2 daughters, Jon Snow goes north, eventually Robb goes down south, Catelyn leaves. They all have a terrible time for the most part, but Bran, until Theon Greyjoy shows up and brings the sea rushing over the walls of Winterfell, Bran is allowed time to just chill. He's for the, like, obviously he loses his dad and all these other terrible things happen to him, but he's chilling in Winterfell for the longest. So we get to find out things about the story through his perspective from Maester Luwin. Now, Maester Luwin is someone who has a Valyrian steel link in his Maester's chain. If you're unaware, I have a piece of hair on my tongue. The only way that you can get a Valyrian steel link on your chain that you forge yourself as a Maester at the Citadel is by studying the higher arts and the mysteries. And that's one of the things that gets revealed about this story via Bran and Maester Luwin is some of the bigger mysteries, right? So for instance, Bran is told, and this is one of my favorite things, that at one point in the world that they live in, so in, the world that Westeros and Essos and dragons are on, and it's medieval ages, there's no exact name for the planet, right? The fandom has dubbed it Planetos. But in that world, at one point, magic was real. Also, gods were real. But then gods die. And when gods died, magic died. So this is a lesson that is told to Bran from someone Maester Luwin is Bran's teacher. He teaches him about all the great houses in the history in Westeros. Who's the lord of this keep? Who's the lord of that keep? Who pledged fealty to House Lannister? Who are his lord's bannermen? All of these things are taught to him through Maester Luwin. So when a learned man tells you, Bran, but you're reading from his POV, so as the reader, you assume on the role of Bran and Jon and Ned and all these characters that you read, right? That's why George is such a good author. When you do that and you hear a learned man tell you that all of the mysteries are gone from the world, well, then you get disheartened. You believe him. And then you have, in Bran's story, we have Mira and Howland Reed showing up, and they're Cranog men. And guess what? I said Howland, but I mean Jojen. Jojen Reed is a Greenseer, and he very much has studied some of the higher mysteries and was allowed to learn things that Bran was told was a fool's errand and were childish things. So when he comes up and he tells Bran that he has these visions, and in one of these visions in particular, he sees the sea rising over the walls of Winterfell, and a lot of the people, characters that are in Bran's plotline in A Game of Thrones and in Clash of Kings, a lot of those characters, right, Bran is told by Jojen that Jojen sees them in his visions dead, okay? So Bran is conflicted. He's told by Maester Luwin, right, that magic and gods at one point may have been real, but they're dead and they no longer exist. But then Jojen tells him sort of the complete opposite of that, right? That no, magic is real, the gods are real, and the person that is calling to you in your dreams is trying to unlock your third eye. And when you unlock your third eye, you will have power unleashed upon you. Bran is fighting his wolf dreams. He denies it. Like, it's really, really interesting. Jojen and Mira try to confront Bran, and they sort of corner him, right? his direwolf Summer is with him, but they start pressuring him. They say, like, when you're in these wolf dreams, we saw you. You came up to me. Remember, like, Breanne is telling himself that he's just dreaming and they're not real. What he's doing every night, he's leaving his body through astral projection and warging into his direwolf Summer and living life through Summer's body, right? So he's running again. He can smell better than he ever could. He could see better than he ever could. He's on the hunt. He's eating blood, like, or he's eating animals, tasting blood, like all these amazing things. But Breanne just ignores it, fights it, denies it, and just chalks it up to, oh, he's just having bad dreams, and those bad dreams are because he can't walk again. And like, Jojen confronts him in the mirror, right? They tell him, no, that's not the case. You're a warg. You're destined for so much more. Magic is real, gods are real, and you're potentially destined to get the heck out of here and go see this three-eyed crow, right? So it's a really interesting story that we get from Breanne, because eventually he does leave Winterfell, right? So what happens in the TV show is Winterfell is sacked. Theon kills the Miller boys and pretends they're Breanne, and then Breanne eventually escapes Winterfell when Ramsay comes and kills Theon, or tricks Theon. Like, the show, it's so convoluted, but basically Breanne and Rickon and Asha and Hodor are hiding out in the crypts of Winterfell the entire time, and they release their direwolves to go and confuse Theon, because Theon has a hunting party, go and track Breanne and Rickon and the direwolves, and he can't find them, and he's trying to figure out where the hell they could have gone. And then eventually he comes up with the idea via Reek, who's under the guise of Ramsay, and Reek pulls out a brooch head, a direwolf head brooch with jet and jade and lapis lazuli, all those fancy things, right? It literally has it's a silver brooch, and it's got two jet, which is like a black gemstone. It's the eyes for the House of Direwolf. So then he gets the idea, oh, okay, well, we'll kill these Miller boys who are the same size, same age as Breanne and Rickon, and then I'll go back to Winterfell and let everybody know I don't play, right? So when he does that, Breanne and Rickon are hiding underneath in the crypts of Winterfell that whole time. And it's interesting because when Bran's down there, it's completely black, it's pitchless. It's very similar to the black cells underneath the Red Keep that Ned Stark is held in. It's kind of interesting as a parallel, because like right before Ned dies, he's kept in the black cells. And then right before Bran goes on his journey to awaken, he stays in the depths of Winterfell, the crypts of Winterfell, where it's really dark. But also Bran, while he's down there, sort of gets the feel and just has this darkness that takes over him, and he's in a constant state of warging, but also he feels weird vibes because the Starks of Winterfell, a lot of people think that the Starks are similar to the Undying Ones that Daenerys runs to in the House of Black and White, whereas like the rumor goes that there must always be a Stark in Winterfell, and that the iron swords in the crypts of Winterfell that are laid across the laps of the old Stark kings of Winter are supposedly keep them at bay. So basically George is building up this idea and kind of giving you this idea that House Stark descended from these White Walker type creatures, right? So what it may be is that one Stark during this crazy long winter probably made a deal with the White Walkers, with the Children of the Forest, to extend his life in order to rule the North and keep his house still in power. Because when you think about it, and you read the history of Winterfell itself, and like it used to be this series of old ring forts, and like the part of Winterfell that you see is not exactly the best way to date and determine how old Winterfell is itself, because there's large portions of Winterfell that are kept underground, right? And the Starks don't necessarily maintain those, so it just lets you know that Winterfell is this place, this really old castle, and these Starks have been there for a while, and like even though they've been there for a while, they probably haven't been there the full length of the history of the castle, because the castle is so much older than the history of the Starks themselves. So there's so much that goes into it, right? But those Stark kings, the old kings of Winter that are down there, are probably dormant versions of White Walkers, and the TV show kind of didn't do that. So all of this is sort of getting us prepared for Winds of Winter, because as of right now, as of the last official POV, now I say official because there may be some sample chapters of a certain character I need to get better about reading those sample chapters, but for the most part, a lot of them are so old. The chapters that will come out in Winds of Winter, which is coming in the next 2 years, are probably going to be completely changed from whatever those things say. So it's kind of pointless for me to sit here and pretend as though, I need to take them into my theorizing and study these chapters, right? Because they could either, like I said, be completely changed or cut entirely in, the premise or the storyline or whatever the events and plot that happens in that chapter. It's been so long, George decided to cut it, right? So the last POV that we get from Breanne, right, he finally makes it to Bloodraven's cave. Now, if you're unaware, Bloodraven is this dude who has been around since before any of the events of the main story, right? So the main timeline, there's a damn ghost behind me. The main timeline of events is that, the story starts really 15 years before, Jon Snow was born, or any of the characters really born, and this event happens called Robert's Rebellion. Robert Baratheon basically destroys the Targaryen dynasty because Rhaegar, Prince of Dragonstone, next in line for the Iron Throne after the Mad King, kidnaps his betrothed, Lyanna Stark. Lyanna Stark is the sister of Ned Stark. So Ned Stark teams up with Robert, and they wipe out the Targaryens after Ned Stark's brother and father were killed by the Mad King in King's Landing, right? So that's really what brought Ned into the fold. Obviously, his sister Lyanna being kidnapped, not a good thing, would have brought Ned into the fold anyway, but ultimately his father and brother dying is what threw Ned into. So Robert's Rebellion happens, they wipe out the Targaryens, right? But then, even before that, Bloodraven is this character who, like I said, is a part of the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. He's this dude who was the hand of the king at the time, and he ends up getting sent to the wall for committing treason and going against the actual word of the king, the word of the crown, right? So when he does this, he takes a group of individuals, and I'm just sort of briefly summarizing to wrap up where Bran's going to be in this Winds of Winter prep. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video. Please slap a like on it. Like was going to be 420. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon over on patreon.com/ReviewsReviews. Over there, you get this, but unadulterated, unfiltered, and I upload very frequently. There's several hours, almost 20 hours of content that are exclusive to my patrons. So that's linked down below. Please go consider checking it out. You can join for as little as $1, and you get immediate access to everything, right? So he takes this group of individuals with him known as the Raven's Teeth. Now, these Raven's Teeth individuals, two things to know about them. They all have weirwood bows, and they all potentially are wargs. Now, we haven't gotten all of the United of the Seven Kingdoms books yet, and when we do, and when we get to the part where Bloodraven is sent north, when Duncan Egg, the egg from that story, is a little kid, at the end of it, he becomes king and sends Bloodraven north of the wall. So when we get to that version of it, we'll probably find out, hey, these Raven's Teeth Archer are confirmed to be wargs. That's why they have weirwood bows, right? And that's why they go north of the wall with Brynden Rivers, right? So when Bloodraven, Brynden Rivers, when he gets to the wall, he becomes Lord Commander, and about 2 years after becoming Lord Commander, he goes on a ranging mission and disappears, right? Never heard from again until, in the main storyline, in the most recent book, A Dance with Dragons, Bran gets to Bloodraven. And when he gets to Bloodraven, right, there's time that passes, but ultimately he's forced into the cave. He's being chased by whites, right? But him and Hodor and the two Reeds, right, Mira and Jojen are with him, and Bran notices, this is through his POV, that there's bones all over the floor, right? There's weirwood roots everywhere. Brynden Rivers at this point is 120 years old. He's got roots going in and out of him, like literally growing through his body. He's got a root in particular that grows into his eye, right? And they're all weirwood roots. And there's actually weirwood roots hanging from the cave that he's in. So you could theoretically, as a warg, touch one of those weirwood roots and ultimately warg into the weirwood net and see what's going on in the Seven Kingdoms, wherever there's weirwood trees at. And also, those weirwood roots are holy and protected, and they ward away from White Walkers, right? And also there's caverns and caves and cisterns and everything in Bloodraven's cave that may potentially go all the way underneath all all parts of Westeros. So everybody kind of wonders how Bran will get from the Wall to to King's Landing or Winterfell or anywhere. He'll use Bloodraven's caves that go underneath the Wall, right? And he'll be able to get back into the Seven Kingdoms that way, right? But touching back on the bones and the archers. Now, those archers died. My theory is that when they died, Bloodraven turned them into blood paste, consumed it, and that's what gave him the power to live for so long, right? So obviously he's already a warrior. He could already use the weirwood tree to, enhance his powers and abilities. But ultimately what gave him such prolonged life, like, an extra 60 years almost, is because he consumed and cannibalized the Raven's Teeth archers that went with him north of the Wall. Now, Bloodraven is very much like this individual, Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, in Dune. They have the gift of foresight, the gift that is also a curse, so they can see the future. And in that, everything they do predeterminately is all about seeking out the right path and trying to find the right future. Now, in Dune, you learn through the story that that's a terrible gift that no one should have ever messed with, and you should live each day not knowing what's going to happen. That's the best way to be happy in life. So Paul has all this power, but then immediately hates it. So with Bloodraven, that's not the case. Bloodraven can see the future, so he probably saw, hey, I'm going to consume these Bloodraven, right? So all of that aside, the biggest mystery with him is that we don't know what his goal is, who he's working for, and ultimately what are the true extent of his powers. Because initially he could have tried to, and I'm not the only one who has this theory, but I'll just summarize it here for you. I think Bloodraven initially reached out to Euron, right? He's looking for a replacement, and he's looking at all these potentials, and he reaches out to Euron, and then sees a bit down Euron's path, and then abandons him, and that's what drives Euron to do what he does, seek out places like Ashai and, learn all of this dark magic, is because he was at one point touched by Bloodraven. So it kind of makes you wonder that in the fact that Bloodraven consumes all of these bodies, and his motives and his power, the extent of his power is unknown. It adds this dark air of mystery to him, and it would be really interesting to see how that transfers into Breanne, into Winds of Winter. Now, I've been saying this in a lot of my live streams, and hopefully this video made it more clear, but gods are real. Gods are being reborn, and Breanne is part of that rebirth. So the old gods in the north never quite died. They always had a champion, right? Bloodraven was one of those champions, but now Breanne is becoming the champion of the old gods, and their representative on earth. So is Breanne a demigod like Paul Atreides, Muad'Dib? Yes, he's becoming that. Jon Snow will likely become another. Same with Daenerys. Same with Euron, right? All of these gods that are real are being reborn into individuals they choose. Daenerys, in my opinion, most likely the representative of the fire god, the fire deity that represents a dragon incarnate itself. But Breanne will be the champion for the many-faced old gods of the north. I hope you all enjoyed this. I know this is really long and very little edited, but when I do videos like this, it makes me so much more focused and be able to get out the knowledge that I have, I think, for the A Song of Ice and Fire, but mostly the love that I have for it. And hopefully you are enlightened a little bit more and are prepared for what's going to happen to Breanne when Winds of Winter does eventually come out. Thank you for watching. Alongnat. My name's Mark, and Zaldrizas Pustari Ixos Daor. This has been Sir Hunts. I haven't done this in a while. Rip Muse.